On the day of my son's funeral, my manager sent me a text: "Attendance is mandatory or you're out." My coworker said, "You chose a baby over your career?" Week. Just 7 hours after my son's funeral, I sat at the boardroom table with a folder full of what they feared most. I can't believe I'm posting this, but I feel like I need to get it out there. A few days ago, my 5-year-old son, Lucas, tragically passed away. His father and I were separated, but we had always kept things amicable. It was a freak accident, and I don't think I'll ever be able to fully understand how or why it happened. But that's not the worst part. The worst part was that the day after the funeral, my manager sent me a text saying my attendance was mandatory for a meeting, or I'd be fired. I thought it was a joke, but it wasn't. To make matters worse, one of my coworkers, Jenna, said to me, "You chose a baby over your career?" Week. I ended up going to that meeting, less than 7 hours after burying my son. But what happened next? Well, let's just say I walked into that room with a folder full of things they never saw coming. It's been a whirlwind since then. I had always been the kind of person who kept my personal life separate from my work life. But when Lucas died, everything became a blur. My son had always been my light, my reason for working so hard, for keeping it together despite the tough times I'd been through. I had my fair share of struggles with my ex-husband, but Lucas was my anchor. He was the best part of my life. I remember the day it happened clearly. Lucas was at the park with his dad when he fell. His father called me in a panic, and I rushed to the hospital. By the time I arrived, it was too late. The doctor told me there was nothing they could do. I felt like my world was over. I can still remember the silence that followed. People tried to comfort me, to console me, but nothing could fill the emptiness that consumed me. The funeral was a blur. Everyone gathered, family, friends, all the people who cared, but deep down, I felt completely alone. Then came the message from Derek, my manager. It was the morning after the funeral. I had just woken up, still numb, still aching. I hadn't even had a chance to process what had happened. As I sat on the edge of my bed, trying to figure out how to face another day, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Derek. "Attendance is mandatory at tomorrow's meeting, Marissa. If you're not there, you're out." I couldn't believe it. I stared at the screen, waiting for the words to sink in. I was barely holding it together after losing my son, and this man had the audacity to text me about a meeting? A work meeting? The day after I had buried my child? I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw my phone across the room. But instead, I simply sat there. The anger simmered inside me, but I didn't know what to do with it. I couldn't let it go. I couldn't let Derek's cold, thoughtless message define me, not when my world was already in pieces. I texted him back, but I didn't get a reply. At least not immediately. For a moment, I considered calling in sick and staying home, wallowing in my grief. But then I remembered what I had been through over the last few years. I had worked hard to get where I was at the company. I had earned my place, through sacrifice, through late nights, through juggling family and work responsibilities. But Derek? He didn't care. I was just another cog in the machine to him. The next morning, I forced myself to get out of bed. I dressed in my black suit, my power suit, the one I had worn to every important meeting and every major corporate event. I figured if I was going to walk into that room, I might as well do it with my head held high. When I walked into the office, the first thing I noticed was the coldness in the air. The usual hum of activity was quieter today. Maybe it was because people knew what had happened, or maybe it was just the tension from the higher-ups. Derek was already at his seat in the boardroom, papers scattered in front of him. He didn't even look up when I walked in. I sat down in my usual seat, not bothering to acknowledge him. He could already tell I was upset, but he didn't care. He never did. "You're late," Derek said flatly, without lifting his gaze from his paperwork. I didn't respond. How could I? What was there to say? I had just buried my son. But I couldn't let Derek see how vulnerable I was. Not after everything. The meeting began, and I couldn't focus. The words being thrown around didn't mean anything to me. I barely registered the conversations happening about the new project proposals and the budget cuts. My thoughts kept drifting back to Lucas. I couldn't stop thinking about how I'd never get to see his face again, hear his laughter, or feel his little arms wrapped around me. As I tried to keep my composure, I could feel eyes on me from across the table. Jenna, one of the younger coworkers, was watching me. She had never liked me. She thought I was too focused on my work, too distant. I could see the judgment in her eyes, the way she looked at me with a mixture of disbelief and contempt. Finally, after what felt like hours, the meeting ended. But Derek wasn't done with me. He called me into his office. "Close the door," he said as I entered. I did, my heart pounding in my chest. "Listen, I understand that you're going through something right now," he began, his voice almost patronizing, "but we've got a business to run, and your absence is affecting productivity. If you want to keep your job, you need to pull yourself together." I stood there, not knowing how to respond. Part of me wanted to collapse in front of him, to tell him how unfair it was, how everything felt so out of control. But I didn't. I couldn't let him see how weak I felt. Instead, I kept my voice steady. "I understand," I said, though every fiber of my being wanted to scream at him. I turned to leave, but before I could reach the door, I heard Jenna's voice from the hallway. "You chose a baby over your career?" she called out, her voice dripping with disdain. Weak. The words hit me harder than I expected. I could feel the sting of her judgment, her belief that I had made the wrong choice. That I had somehow chosen my son over my career. But I didn't respond. I just walked out of the office, the weight of the world on my shoulders. I spent the next few hours in a haze. But then something inside me snapped. I was done. I was done letting them treat me like I was expendable. I had nothing left to lose. I went home that night and gathered everything I had been working on for weeks, the documents, the emails, the financial records. The things that would expose Derek and the shady practices at the company. I knew it wasn't going to be easy, but I had learned over the years how to dig deeper than anyone expected. And I wasn't going to let them get away with it. The next morning, I walked into the office with one thing on my mind. I wasn't there to negotiate. I wasn't there to beg for my job. I was there to take control. I sat down at the boardroom table, placed the folder in front of Derek, and calmly opened it. "These are the things you've been hiding," I said, my voice unwavering. "This is everything I've uncovered about the financial mismanagement and the unethical practices you've been running for years." Derek froze. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The color drained from his face as he scanned the pages in front of him. But there was no going back. And that, I realized, was the moment I had taken back control of my life. Derek's silence hung in the air like a thick fog. He was no longer the calm, collected manager I had once known. His face twisted as he scanned the pages I had laid before him. His fingers trembled ever so slightly as he flipped through the documents. It was almost laughable how quickly the man who had held so much power over my career turned into someone so visibly rattled. I didn't flinch. I didn't look away. This wasn't about petty revenge. This wasn't even about getting back at Derek for how he treated me, or for the cruel, cold-hearted text he had sent me on the day of my son's funeral. No, this was about justice. This was about taking everything I had learned from the past few years, every late-night email, every call, every shady decision, and using it for something that mattered. Derek looked up, his face pale, his usual confidence crumbling before me. "You can't just do this," he muttered, his voice weak now, shaking. "This will ruin everything. You have no idea what you're getting into, Marissa." I folded my arms across my chest, trying to suppress the anger that threatened to bubble up. "Don't talk to me about ruining everything, Derek. You've been ruining lives for years. You thought you could intimidate me, that you could push me around because you knew how badly I needed this job. Well, guess what? I don't need it anymore." I let that sink in. I had always been afraid of losing my job. I had always been afraid of what would happen if I spoke up, if I rocked the boat. But when you've lost everything, the fear starts to fade. There was no job, no position, nothing that could ever replace what I had lost. And because of that, I was free. For a long moment, Derek said nothing. His eyes flicked back to the documents in front of him, then back to me, his face a mix of panic and anger. He opened his mouth to say something, but no words came out. It was as if he realized, for the first time, that he was no longer in control of the situation. And that was the sweet, bitter satisfaction I never thought I would feel, watching him finally come face to face with his own vulnerability. From the corner of the room, I could feel the other eyes on me. I wasn't imagining it, they were all watching, waiting. Jenna, especially. She stood at the back, her arms crossed, clearly displeased with what was happening. I caught her eyes for a brief second, and there it was again, the same judgment, the same sense of superiority she had held over me all this time. "You don't know what this will cost you," Derek said finally, his voice still trembling. "Do you think this is just about you? About some personal vendetta? This will impact your career forever, Marissa. You won't get a job in this industry again." I could hear the threat in his words. But instead of backing down, I leaned forward slightly, my gaze locked onto his. "Do you really think I care about that anymore?" I asked, the bitterness in my voice surprising even me. "I buried my son yesterday, Derek. I'm not afraid of losing my job, my reputation, or anything else. What you've done, what you've been doing for years, matters more to me than any paycheck or corporate title. You've taken too much from too many people, and it's time for it to stop." Derek opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out. For a long while, he just sat there, staring at me as if he couldn't understand what I was saying. I could almost see the gears turning in his head, trying to come up with a way to salvage his reputation, to regain control. But it was too late. There was no going back. I stood up from my seat slowly, my hands shaking, not from fear, but from the adrenaline coursing through me. I knew what I had to do. "I'm not going to make this any harder than it has to be," I said, turning toward the door. "I've already sent these documents to the board. I'm sure they'll be very interested in what you've been up to. But if you try to make this go away, if you try to bury it, I'll make sure everyone knows what you've done." I didn't wait for his reply. I just walked out of the boardroom, my steps heavy but purposeful. As I passed by the others in the office, I could feel their stares. The whispers. The fear. It was palpable. Some of them must have already known what Derek had been up to, but they were too afraid to speak out. I wasn't afraid anymore. I had nothing to lose. I knew the risk I was taking. The path I was walking was not going to be easy. Derek's power wasn't just within the company, it stretched far beyond that. But I also knew that I couldn't let him keep getting away with it. I had to do this for myself, for my son, for everyone who had ever been silenced in the name of corporate greed. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I sat in my office, the weight of what I had just done settling on my shoulders. I couldn't think straight. I couldn't eat. I could barely focus on anything. But there was a sense of relief, too. A sense of finality. I knew I had done the right thing. That was what mattered most. At the end of the day, as I gathered my things and prepared to leave, I saw Derek again. He was standing by the elevator, his expression tight, eyes cold. He looked like a man who had just lost everything, and, in a way, he had. "Are you really going to do this?" he asked, his voice low, almost pleading. I paused for a moment. I wanted to say something to him. I wanted to ask him how he could live with himself. But I didn't. I just nodded. "Yes, Derek. I am," I said, and for the first time in a long while, I felt a weight lift off my chest. I walked away, the sound of the elevator doors closing behind me, and I knew there was no turning back. I had made my choice. And whatever came next, I was ready. The days that followed were a blur of anxiety and relief. The tension I'd felt in the boardroom with Derek still lingered in the back of my mind, but I couldn't focus on the weight of it right then. There was too much happening around me, too much fallout to process. I didn't sleep much in the days after sending the documents to the board. I was constantly checking my phone, waiting for a response, for an email, a call. But nothing came immediately. I suppose I had expected an immediate backlash, a company-wide announcement or an angry text from Derek, demanding that I take back what I'd done, begging me to let it go. But instead, there was silence. I wondered if the company was just too large, too entrenched in its own web of power and secrecy, to notice what I had exposed. But I knew that wouldn't last long. The truth always had a way of coming to light. And when it did, there would be no way for Derek or anyone else involved to deny it. The morning after I walked out of that boardroom, I took a deep breath as I prepared for whatever might come next. I had a long day ahead of me, but first, I needed to check my email. I had been avoiding it, afraid of what I might find, but I couldn't ignore it any longer. I opened my inbox, my heart pounding in my chest as I scrolled through the messages. There were a few work-related emails, mostly junk, and then one from the board members. It was short, but it was all I needed to see. Dear Marissa, we have reviewed the information you sent us regarding corporate mismanagement and unethical practices within the company. We would like to meet with you in person to discuss the details. Please let us know when you are available. The relief I felt when I read that was overwhelming. I wasn't sure if I was shaking from fear or exhaustion, but I quickly typed a response, agreeing to meet with them the following day. The ball was finally in motion. It wasn't until later that afternoon that I got a message from Jenna. I hadn't expected to hear from her at all, especially after the things she had said to me. But her text was simple, almost too polite. Can we talk? I stared at the message for a moment, unsure of what to do. She was one of the few people I hadn't really confronted about what had happened. I had been so focused on Derek and the board that I hadn't thought much about how the rest of the office was reacting to everything. Part of me wanted to ignore her, to leave her to her own devices. But another part of me knew that she was probably just as caught up in this situation as I was. She might have been a source of some of the judgment, but I also knew that people like her often didn't speak out unless they were scared, too. I wasn't sure if I was ready for a confrontation, but I also knew that if I was going to stand tall in this, I couldn't afford to walk away from it all. I typed out a quick response, I'm at the office right now. Come by when you're free. Less than an hour later, I saw Jenna standing outside my office door. She knocked gently, then stepped in without waiting for me to answer. Her usual confidence was gone. She looked smaller, somehow, and more unsure of herself than I had ever seen her. Hey, she said quietly, her eyes meeting mine. I just wanted to say that I'm sorry. For what I said the other day. I didn't mean it like that. I raised an eyebrow, not entirely sure how to respond. Really? I asked, keeping my voice level. Because it didn't sound like an apology. Her face flushed with embarrassment. She fidgeted with the hem of her sleeve, then let out a small, defeated sigh. I know. I was being a dimwit. Honestly, I didn't even realize how messed up it sounded until I left the office that day. But, after everything that happened, I realized you were right. You had to do what you did. I mean, I don't agree with the way you handled it, but I guess I understand why you did. I stared at her for a long moment, weighing her words. I wasn't sure if she was truly apologetic or if this was just a way for her to save face. But, in that moment, I didn't care. I had been through too much to be concerned with the opinions of someone like Jenna. Still, I appreciated the effort. Thanks, I said simply. I don't need your approval, but I guess I can accept the apology. She nodded, almost relieved. I understand. I just wanted to clear the air. And, I hope this doesn't make things worse for you. I don't know what's going to happen with the company, but I know it's not going to be easy. I gave a small, humorless laugh. Easy? It hasn't been easy for a long time. But I'm not backing down now. Jenna hesitated, then took a step back, as if preparing to leave. "Well, if you need anything, I'm here. I don't know if it'll help, but if you need someone on your side, let me know." I didn't know how to respond to that. Was this genuine concern? Or was she just covering her tracks? It was hard to tell. But in that moment, I didn't care. I didn't need anyone's support but my own. I had already come this far, and I wasn't turning back now. As she left, I found myself alone again, but this time it felt different. The weight on my shoulders hadn't lightened, but I no longer felt the suffocating pressure of uncertainty. I had taken control. Whatever happened next, I was ready for it. The next day, I met with the board members. They were a mix of curiosity, skepticism, and genuine interest. The room was full of sharp suits, their faces a mask of professionalism, but I could see the tension in their eyes as they looked at the documents I had brought. I laid out everything: the emails, the financial discrepancies, the secret deals, and the kickbacks. It was all there. There was no denying it. They listened, carefully taking notes, but I could tell they were already preparing their defense. Derek was a part of their inner circle. He had been for years. This wasn't going to be as easy as handing over a stack of papers and walking away. But I wasn't expecting it to be. "What are you asking for, Marissa?" one of the senior members asked, breaking the silence. His name was Thomas and he had been with the company for decades. He was no fool, but I could see the fear in his eyes. I took a deep breath before responding. "I want Derek gone. I want full transparency in the company's operations, and I want to make sure this never happens again. I want accountability. I want this company to stop operating like it's above the law." There was a long pause. Thomas exchanged a look with the others in the room, his face grim. "And if we don't agree to your terms?" he asked quietly. "I'll make sure the board knows exactly what's been happening," I replied, my voice steady. "You might be able to protect Derek for now, but the truth will come out. You can't hide it forever." Thomas seemed to consider that for a moment, then finally nodded. "We'll need some time to review everything. But don't think for a second that we don't know the stakes. We'll be in touch." I stood up, nodded, and walked out of the room. As the door closed behind me, I realized that, no matter what came next, I had already won. It wasn't about the job anymore. It wasn't about the company. It was about standing up for what was right, no matter the cost. The next few days were a waiting game. A game that felt endless, dragging me through a sea of uncertainty. After my meeting with the board, I left the office with a heavy, but somehow lighter, heart. I had said my piece. Now, it was out of my hands. I had done everything I could to expose the truth. Derek didn't show his face for a while. The board members were all tight-lipped, their usual smirks replaced with cautious expressions. I figured they were trying to strategize, trying to figure out how to avoid the consequences of their actions without publicly acknowledging any wrongdoings. But the silence was unbearable. The company's walls were thick with secrets, and the truth I had uncovered was just the tip of the iceberg. There were a lot of people in that room, people who had spent years turning a blind eye, who had helped cover up Derek's actions. They weren't just going to roll over because I handed them a stack of documents. Still, I didn't feel as helpless as I had before. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't waiting for someone else to fix my problems. I was fixing them myself. My son's death had shattered me in ways I would never fully understand, but it had also given me an unshakable resolve. I wasn't afraid anymore. I had nothing left to lose. That night, as I sat in my apartment, I received a call from the board. My heart skipped a beat as I picked up the phone. "Marissa," Thomas said, his voice surprisingly calm, "we've reviewed the evidence you provided, and we've made some decisions." I held my breath, but my mind raced through all the possibilities. "We've decided to remove Derek from his position immediately," Thomas continued. "We're launching a full internal audit, and we'll be working closely with an independent firm to ensure that everything he's done is thoroughly investigated." I felt the weight of it hit me, but I didn't let myself react just yet. I had to hear more. In addition, he went on, we're putting measures in place to increase transparency within the company. We'll be making a public announcement about the changes, and we're committed to making sure that what's been happening behind closed doors comes to light. We know this won't undo the damage, but we're going to start doing things the right way from now on. I had to stop myself from smiling. This wasn't just a small concession, it was everything I had fought for. Derek was done. The company was on the verge of a complete overhaul. And I had been the catalyst for it all. Thank you, I said simply, my voice steady, trying not to let my emotions get the better of me. That's all I wanted. Thomas paused for a moment, as if considering something. Marissa, I just want you to know that we appreciate the courage you've shown. It wasn't an easy thing to do, and it's not going to be easy for any of us. But we're all in this together now. I hope you know that. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. I just want things to change. For the better. There was a slight pause on the other end, and then Thomas spoke again. We'll be in touch soon with more details. And Marissa, you're welcome to stay with the company if you'd like. Your position is still available. I felt a brief pang of surprise at the offer. They were essentially telling me that they valued me, that they were giving me a second chance. But I knew my answer before he even finished his sentence. I appreciate that, but I think I need to move on, I said. It's time for me to find something that aligns better with my values. I don't think I can be part of the company after everything that's happened. Understood, he replied, his tone acknowledging my decision. I wish you all the best, Marissa. The call ended, and I sat there, my mind spinning. Derek was gone. His empire crumbled under the weight of his own greed. The board had been forced to listen, to make changes. And in the end, it wasn't just the company that was going to change, it was me, too. I took a deep breath, leaning back in my chair. I could feel a kind of peace settling into my chest, a calm I hadn't felt since before the accident. I had won, not by destroying people's lives, but by demanding accountability. I had fought for justice, for the truth, and I had done it on my own terms. I didn't need to stoop to their level or sacrifice my integrity to get what I deserved. The next day, the announcement came. Derek was officially removed from his position, and the company publicly acknowledged the internal audit. The press release was careful, but the message was clear, things were changing. People in the company, from the lower ranks to the executives, were buzzing with the news. Word spread quickly, and it didn't take long for me to hear whispers of people's reactions. Some were shocked. Some were relieved. But the truth was out now, and there was no putting it back in the bottle. I didn't stick around to watch the fallout. I didn't need to. I had already left the company. I took a few days to myself, spent some time with my family, and let everything settle. It felt good to have my peace back, to know that I had taken control of my destiny and used my voice to make real change. But the best part was knowing that I had honored Lucas. Everything I had done, everything I had endured, was for him. A week later, I was offered a new job, one that felt right. It wasn't just a paycheck, it was a place where I could use my skills, my experience, to do meaningful work. It was a fresh start, one that would allow me to heal and to rebuild. As for Derek, his fall from grace wasn't quiet. The company's wrongdoing made headlines, and his name was dragged through the mud. He tried to fight back, tried to salvage what was left of his reputation, but it was too late. People had already seen who he really was. And as much as I wanted to feel vindicated by his downfall, I couldn't bring myself to take pleasure in his misery. I had already won, and it wasn't about revenge. It was about standing up for what was right. A few months later, I got a letter in the mail. It was from the company. Inside was a severance package that included stock options and a generous financial settlement, the kind of package that they typically only offered to top executives. I wasn't sure how they had calculated it, but I knew it was their way of acknowledging the damage they had caused me. It wasn't a fortune, but it was a sign that they understood what had been lost, and it gave me the freedom I needed to move forward without any lingering financial worries. I smiled as I placed the letter in my desk drawer. The past was behind me now. I had closed that chapter of my life. And while I knew the scars would never completely fade, I had taken back my power. I had done it for Lucas. For me. For my future. Sometimes, the best revenge is living well, and I was finally ready to live again.